A black mechanic knelt beneath the billionaire woman's multi-million-dollar jet. Sweat dripped heavily. His hands trembled. Dozens of brazen, condescending eyes were peeling his dignity away, piece by piece. They sneered. They judged. What they didn't know was that the man they were insulting was actually, right at that moment, the billionaire woman approached. Just one glance at the small tattoo on his upper arm. Her face turned pale, and her immediate reaction left the entire world in stunned silence. The story you're about to hear, you won't believe your eyes. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you listening from? Leave a comment telling us where you're watching this story. I love seeing how far our story travels. The early morning wind at Sullivan Skyport slashed across the runway like cold blades, sweeping past the worn-out SUV that had just halted in the VIP zone. And from that faded vehicle, Elias Carter stepped out, slowly, calmly, yet his shoulders carried the weight of 40 years of being judged by nothing more than the color of his skin. Above, in the blue sky, jet engines roared with arrogance, but on the ground, human laughter cut sharper than any knife. This is the specialist they called? Or did the airport accidentally dial a truck repair shop? A row of sharply pressed suit, wearing men stood like cold marble statues. Their eyes swept over Elias, as though examining an outdated object placed in the wrong setting. The scent of expensive cologne, mixed with their disdain, created something more nauseating than the smell of engine oil Elias carried on him. He heard everything, every word, piercing him like tiny needles. But Elias didn't react. He didn't frown. He didn't talk back. He just stood there, silent, like a rock in the middle of a storm. Because he knew his life had never been judged by his skill, only by the color of his skin and the car he drove. Since childhood, prejudice had clung to him like a torn shadow he could never shake off. It seeped into every door he knocked on, every opportunity he reached for. And now it appeared once again, in this luxurious airport, beneath the gilded sunlight of the ultra-rich. Elias tightened his grip on his toolbox, with hands hardened by years of labor, though his heart remained as fragile as it had been on the first day he started working. Every step he took across the runway felt like stepping on thin ice, surrounded by eyes that wanted nothing more than to watch him slip. But those men laughing at him had no idea. In just a few minutes, their lives would depend on the very man they were mocking. And even more, the mechanic they looked down on carried a secret capable of shaking the entire Sullivan Corporation. Elias lifted his head. The sunlight glinted in his eyes, calm yet deep enough to hide what awaited them all. A great storm was coming, and it began at the very moment. They laughed. The harsh laughter on the runway still echoed like metal striking glass. Elias kept walking, trying to steady his breath. But somewhere in the air, something shifted. Not the silence, not a word, but a gaze. If the other stares were icy arrows aimed at him, this one was like a spotlight, cutting through the darkness, revealing what the world had long chosen to ignore. Elias felt it before he even lifted his head. It was the sensation of someone seeing straight into his heart, reading every fracture life had carved into him. Among the expensive suits jeering at him, Victoria Sullivan stood motionless, like a bronze statue against the wind. She did not laugh. She did not smirk. She did not blink. She simply looked. Her gaze was sharp like a blade, thin and cold, not the kind that wished to cut him down, but the kind meant to strip away the dust covering the truth and examine what lay beneath. In those few brief seconds, Elias felt as if someone had read his entire life. The rejections stamped on his skin color, the nights spent awake in an old garage, the dreams that had nearly died. It felt as though she knew he didn't belong in the box where they were trying to confine him. Then Victoria stepped forward. Her heel struck the runway with a crisp clack, sharp enough to freeze every laughing mouth in place. She didn't look at them. She only looked at Elias and spoke in a voice flat and cutting as a razor. "If he fails, I will dismantle your entire engineering team." The runway fell silent. A few executives swallowed hard. Even the most confident began to change expression. The scent of their arrogance dissolved into the air, like the burnt odor of an overloaded wire. Elias remained standing there as Victoria turned and walked away, leaving behind a sentence that felt like a warning. She was not like them. She did not follow the crowd. She did not judge by appearances. It was as if Victoria saw something in Elias, something he wasn't even sure he still possessed after years of being crushed by the world. A strange premonition crept into the air. The storm Elias carried with him. Victoria had just glimpsed the first wave. A single gaze, one that seemed to hold nothing more than empathy and understanding, became the first turning point that would shake the entire Sullivan empire. Victoria's footsteps were so sharp, so decisive, that they sliced through every remaining laugh in the air. And in that moment, Elias understood he could no longer step back. It was as if destiny had just opened a door, and he was being compelled to walk through it. He inhaled deeply, tightened his grip on the toolbox, and moved toward the Hawker LX900, the $70 million diamond of the Sullivan Empire. From afar, the jet's polished body gleamed beneath the early sunlight, beautiful and cold, like a silver blade. No one suspected that beneath that glamorous exterior, a death trap was waiting. No one except Elias. He knelt and opened the panel under the belly of the plane. The smell of hot metal, hydraulic fluid, and cold wind pressed against his chest. Then, a faint hiss. A sound so small that anyone who hadn't lived with airplanes, as if they were old friends, would never hear it. Elias froze. It wasn't a normal leak. It was a mixed pressure leak, something that could turn the cockpit into a floating tomb at 40,000 feet within minutes. A death with no screams, no last words, just bodies suspended in the blue sky. Elias clenched his hand so hard his knuckles turned white. How could Sullivan's elite engineering team miss this? It couldn't be accidental. Impossible. The LX900 was like a beautiful woman in a blazing red gown, hiding a knife plunged straight into her heart. Luxurious, flawless, and moments from dying. He glanced around. Everyone else was still relaxed, still chatting, still wrapped in the illusion of safety they believed belonged to the world of the wealthy. Only one person was watching him silently from afar. Victoria. Her gaze was dense with calculation, as if she had already suspected something was terribly wrong. And Elias sensed. She was waiting to see whether he would notice what an entire 100-person team had conveniently overlooked. He took a slow breath, preparing to enter a battle, not just with the aircraft, but with the truth someone was desperately trying to bury beneath this bright silver shell. What Elias didn't yet know was this. What he discovered today wouldn't just save lives. It would tear apart a 10-year veil of lies. Victoria's razor-sharp words from moments earlier still hung in the air. They hadn't just silenced the executives. They had pushed Elias into a position from which he could no longer retreat. And that very pressure had led him straight to the scene of a deadly flaw. The flaw that cracked open a door to a truth buried for years. But as Elias bent down to repair the pressure leak, something else was unfolding. A discovery he himself didn't realize he had just revealed. Victoria stood about 5 meters away. The runway wind swept lightly across her, brushing her hair to one side, exposing eyes that were observing not just the aircraft, but the man working beneath it. Elias rolled up his sleeve to reach deeper into the panel compartment. A patch of skin on his upper arm caught the sunlight. Victoria saw it instantly. A tattoo. Small, precise. A technical symbol accompanied by 2 encoded letters, EC. In a fleeting second, A shiver ran through her body, as if an invisible current had coursed through her, not because of the tattoo, but because she had seen that symbol before. On the classified blueprint of the A9 Genesis, a $500 million pressure system. 2 symbols, 2 different locations, 6 years apart, yet identical, stroke for stroke. Victoria's heart slammed once inside her chest, as if a missing puzzle piece she had chased for years had just fallen perfectly into place. Meanwhile, Elias kept working, his hands trembling slightly, not trembling from fear that the jet might explode, but from the fear that had killed his career once before, 6 years ago. A single night, a baseless termination, a final verdict, not a cultural fit, and the work of his entire life vanished as if it had never existed. He feared failure, not for reputation, but because if he couldn't prove his worth this time, it would shut the last remaining door left open in his life. Victoria remained standing still, but her gaze had changed. No longer cold, sharper, heavier, like she was finally looking at the very person she had been searching for. A single question blazed through her mind. Elias Carter, who are you really? And in just a few minutes, Victoria would uncover an answer that would shake the entire Sullivan empire. The moment Victoria saw the EC tattoo on Elias's arm felt like an invisible alarm bell ringing inside her. From that second on, she watched him not just with her eyes, but with the instinct of someone who had lived far too long among the dark secrets of the elite. And when Elias finished saving the LX900, when the deadly hiss had been sealed by the hands of a silent genius, Victoria didn't wait a single minute more. She turned, her voice sharp and precise. Follow me. No one understood what was happening. Only Elias felt the cold rush down his spine, a feeling painfully similar to that night 6 years ago, when another door opened and destroyed his life. Victoria led him into a quiet corridor inside the private terminal. The wind from the runway disappeared, replaced by the steady echo of her heels striking the stone floor, loud enough that Elias felt as though he was walking into a courtroom. She opened a metal door, scanned her card, and the white lights blinked on, flooding the sealed room. At the center of the conference table lay a single item, the blueprint of the A9 Genesis system, a thick document, its corners still bearing old folds, carrying the scent of paper mixed with the faint metallic tang of fireproof covers. The moment Elias saw it, he felt as though someone had slapped him backward into his own past. Victoria said nothing. She merely pushed the document toward him. In the corner of the blueprint, hidden beneath layers of advanced technical encoding, was the familiar symbol, EC, identical to the tattoo on his arm, identical to the symbol he had scribbled on a draft on a rainy night 6 years ago, identical to the greatest pride of his life before it was stolen. The air in the room thickened instantly. Elias felt as if every molecule was tightening around his throat. He tried to move his lips, but when he spoke, the words came out weak, almost soundless. This is mine. Victoria stared straight at him, unblinking. 6 years ago, wasn't it? The question dropped like a verdict. 6 years ago, Elias had been fired with a cold, meaningless explanation. Not a cultural fit. And that same night, all of his designs and data vanished from the system. His name erased as if he had never existed. Now, that buried past was lying right in front of him, undeniable, irrefutable. Elias stood frozen, and Victoria spoke the sentence that made his chest tighten. Elias, I need you to tell me the truth. A9 Genesis, is it yours? In that moment, the story was no longer about work, no longer about a technical malfunction. It was a confrontation between truth and the one who had erased it. The air in the sealed room was so thick it felt like a single touch could make it shatter. Elias stood there as if every breath had been drained out of him, while Victoria kept her gaze sharp, sharp enough to pierce through 6 years of layered lies. But the very moment Elias opened his mouth to confess everything, the conference room door burst open. The metallic crash split the silence like a hammer strike. Jonathan Pike appeared. His face was ghost pale, like someone who had just seen an apparition standing right in front of him. And that apparition was the A9 file lying in Victoria's hand. Elias's eyes met his, just for a moment. But it was enough for the memory of the day he was thrown out of the company to roar back through his veins like fire. Jonathan jabbed a finger at the file, his voice cracking apart, furious and trembling. "That technology is mine. You have no right to touch it." His voice screeched like dragged iron, loud, frantic, slippery. Victoria didn't say a word. She simply pressed the remote. Beep. A recording played. The sound was crisp, undeniable. "Erase Carter from the system. From now on, A9 Genesis is under my name." "Understood?" Jonathan's voice. Clear, cold. His face instantly drained of color, turning ashen. But Victoria wasn't finished. She looked him straight in the eye, her tone steady, like reading out a sentence. "So it turns out, you did much more than that." The big screen lit up. A video began playing, grainy, but sharp enough that no one could deny what they saw. Jonathan standing in a dark parking lot, handing a thick envelope to two unfamiliar men. "Erase everything related to Carter. Leave no trace." Those words cracked through the room like lightning across a clear sky. Elias felt his chest tighten, not from pain, but because, at long last, the darkness that had weighed on him for 6 years finally had a face. Jonathan shot to his feet, screaming, "No, that's not me. I was set up." But the video kept rolling. His face, his voice, his hand delivering the envelope, and his orders, each word cutting like a blade. Victoria stood, her every syllable sharp as steel, leaving him no escape. "No one set you up, Jonathan. You dug this grave yourself." Jonathan looked around the room, panicked, disoriented, like a trapped animal with nowhere left to run. And in that instant, Elias realized the truth didn't need him to shout. It knew how to step into the light on its own. But this was only the beginning. Because the villain had finally revealed his face, and what he'd done 6 years ago wasn't even his greatest crime. The conference room door closed after Jonathan was escorted out. That sound echoed heavily, like the final stone dropping into the bottom of a well already filled with sins. No more screaming, no more excuses. No more layers of pretense Jonathan had worn for 6 years. Only the truth remained, and a silence sharp enough to raise goosebumps. Elias stood there, his hand still trembling slightly, not from fear, but because everything he had buried for years was suddenly rising again. Clear, painful, raw. Victoria slowly walked toward the conference table. The icy sharpness she wielded against Jonathan was gone. Her face now carried something else. Fatigue, but also resolve. Like someone who had decided to walk against the very current of her own bloodline. She opened the drawer beneath the table, pulled out a thick file nearly 4 centimeters thick, and slammed it down in front of Elias. The heavy thud made Elias flinch. It felt like a small mountain had just been dropped onto the table, bringing with it a flood of dark secrets waiting to spill out. "Elias, you need to see this." He opened the file. The first page, 12 Black and Latino engineers, all of whom had reported stolen designs. The second page, 31 projects reassigned, all original creators erased and replaced with senior managers' names. The third, an internal chart showing a personnel filter that eliminated only one demographic group, people of color. Elias felt his throat tighten. Each page cut into old memories like a dull blade, slow, painful, unavoidable. Victoria stood beside him, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She turned to the final page, and this was the blow that landed hardest. A confidential directive, a signature, a name everyone in the corporation knew. Harold Sullivan, Victoria's father, the former CEO. He was the architect of the discriminatory system, not Jonathan, not a lower-level manager. but the pillar of the Sullivan dynasty himself. The air in the room thickened, as if someone had sucked out all the oxygen. Elias froze, staring at Victoria, not with anger, but confusion. "How long have you known about this?" Victoria didn't look away. Her voice cracked, fragile like glass under heat. 2 years. It took me 2 years to gather every piece of evidence. And the more I found, the more I realized my father didn't leave behind a legacy. He left a stain. She turned to Elias, eyes reddened yet unshaken. "I have to make this right. I have to undo what my father built. And I can't do it alone." In that moment, Elias understood. Standing before him wasn't the cold, untouchable CEO of a billion-dollar empire. She was a woman fighting her own blood to tear down an unjust system. And this truth was only the first layer of the storm that was about to tear the Sullivan empire apart. The security warning from the previous chapter wasn't just a message. It was the alarm bell for the final battle. A battle Elias and Victoria knew they could no longer step back from. That very night, Victoria ordered a full lockdown of the entire data system. Elias handed over all the evidence he had kept hidden for 6 long years. And the following morning, the board of shareholders convened an emergency meeting, so crowded that the luxurious conference room suddenly felt suffocating, like an actual courtroom. No one said it, but everyone understood. Today was the day the truth reclaimed its voice. When the lights dimmed, the speakers came on. The very first sound froze the entire hall. Jonathan Pike's voice, clear, sharp, venomous. "Erase everything related to Carter. A man like him should never have his name recorded in our history." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Next, the giant screen lit up. The camera footage showed Jonathan handing envelopes to 2 men in a parking lot, the streetlight carving shadows across his face, shaping him into a wolf, grinning with malice. "Take it all. Erase it all. Leave no trace." The room held its breath. Then another slide appeared, a thick archive of black engineers whose work had been stolen. Their names, their timelines, their stolen dreams. The air in the room seemed to freeze. And finally, Victoria projected the original A9 Genesis blueprint, the true version, with the initials EC marked large and unmistakably undeniable to anyone present. In the dead silence, Victoria stood tall, her voice carrying like a verdict. "From this day forward, this corporation will be built on intelligence, not skin color." Some lowered their heads. Some looked at Elias with a mix of shame and astonishment. And then Victoria announced what no one had ever expected. Elias Carter will now serve as Chief Technology Strategist. The hall erupted into frantic murmurs. He will also reclaim all intellectual property rights, and 30% of the shares in the next generation green technology project. Elias rose to his feet, not proud, not vindictive, just quietly exhaling, like a man finally setting down the stone he had carried on his chest for 6 years. But the story wasn't over. Outside, the media was exploding like a storm, and Elias was about to step into a role he had never dared to dream of. After the explosive shareholders' meeting in the previous chapter, the entire Sullivan Corporation felt as if it had just weathered a storm that swept away every layer of deception. But for Elias, that victory was not an ending. It felt more like the very first exclamation mark, opening a path he had always wished others could walk beside him. Because Elias understood one truth with painful clarity. If he was the only one allowed to lift his head, then that wasn't justice. It was merely a delayed consolation. That belief was what led him to a morning exactly 1 year later. Instead of a luxurious conference room, Elias now stood before an old building that had been completely rebuilt. A new sign gleamed under the sunlight. Phoenix Engineering Center. A free engineering center for Black and minority youth and low-income families. Phoenix, the name wasn't a coincidence. It was his own story, rising from the ashes of prejudice, reborn, and becoming a guiding flame for others. The atmosphere inside the small hall was warm. Children's laughter mixed with the scent of fresh paint, new notebooks, and newly opened opportunities. Elias inhaled deeply, the smell of real hope, not the polished promises of speeches. And then came the moment that made the entire room fall silent. His mother, Ms. Darlene, walked in, the woman who had worked as a janitor for 40 years, in buildings where her son was not allowed to enter through the front door. She took a seat in the front row, her calloused hands trembling, as if she still couldn't believe her son was now the one opening doors for so many others. Elias saw his mother. His heart ached, but it was the kind of ache warmed by every wound finally healing. He stepped up to the wooden podium, the microphone shaking slightly in his hand. His voice was low, steady, no longer the voice of a man people once dismissed. Justice. He paused, looking at his mother, the woman who had endured every contemptuous stare so he could stand here today, is not just returning what was taken. The room held its breath. Justice is widening the doors, so that those who come after us won't have to walk through the pain we once did. Tears streamed down Ms. Darlene's aging face. Elias stepped down and held her trembling hand, as if he were holding an entire generation, forced to suffer in silence. The audience rose to their feet. The applause roared like thunder, not for Elias himself, but for the door that had just been opened, wide and bright, for everyone who had ever lived under the shadow of prejudice. In life, not everyone is born with the chance to stand where the light reaches. Some spend an entire lifetime being overlooked, underestimated, and judged by the color of their skin before they are ever seen for their intellect. But Elias's story reminds us of this. True light doesn't come from where we are given a place. It comes from where we choose to ignite it, even in the darkest corner. Justice isn't only about one person reclaiming their dignity. Real justice is when the doors are opened wide, for everyone who has ever been stopped simply because they were different. And sometimes we forget something important. The strongest people aren't the ones who steal credit. The strongest are those kind enough to turn their pain into a path for others to walk on. If this story touched your heart, share it. A word of encouragement, a respectful look, even a small opportunity, can change an entire life. And who knows, you might be the next person to spark the flame of fairness. You've listened to the whole story, so follow me, and let's keep walking together in the next chapter.